Hi, I'm Dr. Judy Morgan, and today I want to talk about spaying females. There's been a huge increase in early spay neuter in the United States. And the reason for that is that we have huge problems with population control for pets in this country. And really what we have is a bunch of irresponsible pet owners who are allowing their pets to get bred all the time, and then they don't take care of those animals. We have a huge stray population, and it's really out of control, and so a lot of pets get euthanized at the shelters on a daily basis in this country. So the shelters have gone to, and the rescue associations have gone to, spaying or neutering before they will adopt animals out. It's a great idea because we don't seem to be able to be responsible and keep our pets from breeding willy-nilly, so it's a good thing. However, what are the problems associated with this early spay neuter? A lot of these puppies are getting spayed at 8 to 10 weeks of age, and that is starting to show some problems. And some studies have been done recently which have been really good, showing some of the problems that are associated with that early spay. So as veterinarians, and believe me, I was one of them for many years, we have routinely recommended spaying before 6 months of age. And the arguments that we would use were, well, if you spay before the pet goes into heat, you'll have a 0 risk of mammary cancer. If you spay before the pet ever goes into heat, you'll have a 0 risk of pyometra, which is a really awful, life-threatening infection of the uterus. However, we are now seeing that pets who go through that first heat cycle don't really have a big increase in risk for either of those problems. If females are spayed by about 2.5 years of age, the increase in risk of mammary cancer is really negligible, almost 0. So we can allow these pets to develop to full maturity and finish their growth and have the protective benefits of those hormones until about 2.5 years of age. If you're planning on breeding, obviously you're not going to spay at 2.5 years of age. But if you're not planning on breeding and you're a responsible pet owner, allowing your pet to develop to full maturity really has some beneficial effects. So what are the problems that we see with this early spay that we've been pushing for so many years? The results are in from some of these studies, and what we are seeing is that pets that are spayed early are showing an increased risk in a lot of cancers, joint problems, obesity, incontinence, all kinds of things. So for hemangiosarcoma, we're seeing a more than 2-fold increase in splenic and cardiac hemangiosarcoma in these dogs that are spayed before maturity. We're also seeing an increased risk in osteosarcoma. These are really horrible cancers. They'll kill your dog within a matter of months. So if we can be responsible pet owners and wait to allow the dogs to reach full maturity before we spay, why wouldn't we do that to protect them from these horrible diseases that we'll see later in life? We have a 3-fold increased risk of hypothyroidism in dogs that are spayed before reaching maturity. Now, I think that hypothyroidism is an endocrine disease and is being caused by a lot of other things besides just the early spay. We need to look at the overvaccination. We need to look at the overuse of pesticides and chemicals on our dogs, which all affect the endocrine system. But there's a definite link between early spay and risk of hypothyroidism. We see a 2-fold risk of obesity in pets that are spayed early and not allowed to reach full maturity. You're the one in charge of feeding. If you have your pet spayed, calculate the number of calories that your pet needs. Weigh your pet every couple of months. If the weight is going up, decrease the calories fed. Feed a more species-appropriate diet. Decrease the carbohydrates in the diet. Get them on a meat-based diet. Don't allow your pet to become obese just because they were spayed. The increase in obesity may be linked to the increase in diabetes, but we also see an increased risk of diabetes in pets that are spayed young. Is that because it's affecting the endocrine system? Is that because of the increased risk of obesity? We don't really know, but there is an increased risk of diabetes in pets that are spayed before maturity. We also see an increased risk of recessed vulva, vaginitis, and vaginal dermatitis. For puppies that I see that have a recessed vulva, which is a vulva that's kind of tucked into a little pocket, I describe it as having the, kind of an innie belly button versus an outie. Well, we really want the vulva to be an outie, not an innie. When the vulva is recessed into a little pocket, there's a huge increased risk in urinary tract infections and bladder stones. So you want to allow them to go through a couple of heat cycles, because when they go into heat, the vulva will swell up, and that will help bring the vulva out to a more normal position. If the vulva does not come out from that tucked in position, then there is a surgery called a Volvo Plasti. I actually do it fairly commonly because these dogs are so prone to repeat bladder infections and bladder stones, and sometimes that's the only way to solve the problem. But if you have a dog with that problem, you definitely want to allow them to go through a couple of heat cycles and see if it'll come down for you. Dogs that are spayed early also have a twofold risk increase in urinary tract tumors, so bladder cancers. These dogs have a huge risk of developing urinary incontinence, and they will respond to estrogen supplementation. So that tells us right there that, spaying too early and getting rid of the hormones is a huge problem, and it's definitely contributing to the urinary incontinence. I'm not a big fan of using estrogen to treat that. There are other treatments that we can use. Estrogen can have side effects, including death of your pet from bone marrow suppression. That's another video. Other things that we see with early spay before maturity is increased risk of orthopedic problems. Spaying early before reaching full maturity will delay the closure of the growth plates in the bones. By increasing the length of the long bones, it causes deformities in the joint socket. So, for instance, the hip socket. So we have an increased risk of hip dysplasia. We have an increased risk of ACL tears, which may also be related to the increased risk of obesity. And we see an increased risk of patella luxations in females that are spayed before maturity. So here's the deal. Be a responsible pet owner. Don't allow your female to get bred before maturity, and don't allow your female to be spayed early, because you need to prevent all these problems. Allow them to develop to full maturity. Now, that does mean you're going to have to put up with a few heat cycles, and that means you have to keep the boys away, and you have to watch your little girls. And if you think that those little panties that they sell that you put on your girls are going to protect them from the boys, oh boy, those boys will rip those off in a heartbeat. Boys will go over, under, and around fencing. Putting your dog on a tie out in the yard is not responsible pet ownership. So be responsible and talk to your veterinarian about the pros of waiting for your little girl to reach full maturity before you spay. It's really important for their long-term health. If you're not a responsible pet owner, then go ahead and get them spayed before 6 months of age. Don't allow them to go into heat. I see way too many little girls who haven't even finished growing up and they're already pregnant, and that's not a good thing. If you're a breeder, do not breed your dogs every heat cycle. Give them one off in between. So that means no more than 1 litter per year. I prefer one every 1.5 years. Be responsible with your pets and be a responsible pet owner. Take good care of your pets. Take good care of yourselves. Talk to you soon.